Hi, everyone. So welcome to our March 9th edition of the MIT Enterprise Forum Community Stream. We are extremely lucky and excited to have Dr. Sherry Turkle with us. Professor Turkle just released a new book, actually about a week ago on March 2nd. And we are going to talk to her a little bit about her book, The Empathy Diaries, and then also her personal journey, which is all wrapped up in her new memoir. Sherry, we're so lucky to have you. Thank you so much for joining us for Women's History Month and to this forum. And I know we've got, audience members who are probably very eager to ask some questions as well. So just a reminder to our audience that as you're watching, please feel free to engage with us. We'll keep an eye out for any questions and try to incorporate them into our conversation. So I am going to introduce you a little bit formally with the bio that we have, just so our audience gets a sense, if they don't know already, who you are. So Dr. Sherry Turkle is the Abby Rockefeller Mauzé Professor of the Social Studies, of Science and Technology in the program in Science, Technology, and Society at MIT, and a founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. Professor Turkle received a joint doctorate in sociology and personality psychology from Harvard and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Professor Turkle writes on the subjective side of people's relationships with technology, especially computers, and she's an expert on culture and therapy, mobile technology, social networking, and sociable robots. So her newest book is called The Empathy Diaries, a memoir, available by Penguin Press. And also just to note that we will, and I'll repeat this again, we have a link to where to get the book on our community website as well. And The Empathy Diaries ties together her personal story with her groundbreaking research on technology, empathy, and ethics. And Dr. Turkle also has a number of previous books, actually, around the subjects of technology, our relationship with technology, and our evolving relationships with digital culture. So, Dr. Turkle, thank you again for joining us. We're very excited to have you. Thanks for Zooming in. And we're actually going to go ahead and, get it kicked off already with a conversation just from the top. And so your new book has been out for about a week now, and it is a memoir. So you dive deep into sort of your personal journey and your history and your career path, actually. And so I did want to get it kicked off there. Maybe it's a lot to dig into. But why don't we start actually with the beginning, actually, if that's okay. So you were raised in Brooklyn, right here in New York. Is that right?
Yes, I was raised in Brooklyn. But the beginning of the book describes, I call it Summer Palace, Winter Palace. And I describe sort of a life where my family divided its time between living in Brooklyn and living in Rockaway, where during the 50s, when I was growing up, the area called Rockaway Beach was a place where there were kind of bungalow colonies where working class New Yorkers really could rent, I think it was $50 for the season, a ratty-tatty little 1 or 2 bedroom bungalow. I slept in the living room with my mother on a daybed, where 5 adults kind of crowded into this 1 bedroom bungalow. We had a 1 bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. We had a 1 bedroom bungalow in Rockaway, and it was a very idyllic childhood in some ways, a lot of community. When I talk about Rockaway, there's a line in the book that says, "In the evenings we sang to each other," and that's really captures life in Rockaway. There's a lot of playing cards, a lot of puzzles, a lot of singing to each other. But my family had a family secret. The crux of this book is that I was the child of the first marriage of my mother's, and she didn't want anyone to know about it. Mm-hmm. No one. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't allowed to use my name. Mm. My name was Sherry Zimmerman, and no one could call me that. Mm-hmm. I was told that no one was to know about this secret Zimmerman past. Mm-hmm. It was as though I had no father. I was just part of the Bonowitz clan. And it's the story really of this girl who had, and when my mother remarried, I took the name of her new husband, which was Turkle. Even before he adopted me, my name was Sherry Turkle. And when I came home from school, I had to hide my notebooks and papers, which of course said Zimmerman because that was my legal name, so that my stepsister and brother wouldn't see my secret name. So it really is a story of how to try to figure out why everybody was keeping the secret. I had to develop a kind of empathy for the adults in my life, and also become the Nancy Drew, the detective of my own life.
Right.
And that's really where the story begins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you do talk a little bit about, the family secret, definitely. And also, could you describe to us how that kind of led you to maybe do some questioning, some detective work, like you said, and then how did
Yeah.
that sort of cultivate your sense of empathy as a child, actually?
Well, the question is what was this? What was wrong? Why was everybody hiding the secret? I mean, partly there was a cultural taboo in those days about being divorced, and there was an issue that my mother was wanting to fit in with what I guess you'd call Brooklyn normal. But I sensed that there was something else. I sensed that there was something about my father that was being hidden, because this was really more of a fuss than you would make just to hide a divorce. And really, I spent, and one of the themes of the book is really the effect of keeping a secret on a child.
Right.
And I kept this secret until I was really in my late 20s, when there was a funny story. I had just published The Second Self, which is my first book about the computer culture. And I had been listed as, I don't know, maybe I was in my mid 30s, excuse me, when I published this. And I was listed as one of Esquire magazine's 40 people under 40 who were changing the nation, and they came to interview me because I was on the cover and sort of, do a puff piece about me. The interviewer asks me, so he says, you acknowledge all your family in your book. You don't mention anything about a father. Tell me, what did your father do? Tell me a little bit about your father. And I was like, oh no, I can't talk about my life. I can only talk about my work. I can't, but my whole story in my work, the whole theme of my work was the integration of thought and feeling. That was like my brand. And so there I was, behaving like such a nut in front of this Esquire magazine guy who just asked me the simplest question. But I had promised my mother, my mother's dying wish, because she died when I was in college, her wish was that we would never, that this father thing would never come to light. I would never find him. I would never speak of him. And then I realized that no, it stops here. I mean, I was just clearly, this had to end. It stopped, I was behaving so oddly. And I showed this guy out. And he wrote really, when he wrote this article about me, he really makes fun of me. He says, well, her brand may be the integration of thought and feeling, but when you meet her, that's not how she is at all. She's like, really? She's not like that at all. And I said to myself, it stops here. And I picked up the phone and I called my stepsister and brother, my half sister and brother. And I said, look, I had a father other than your father. And I called my stepfather and I said, it stops here. And it was really the beginning of my memoir writing, because I realized that it was very important for me to write this book and tell this story, because I felt that my whole choice of career, which has been a kind of empathy detective work, really had been very shaped by this, by my personal story. And I had never read a book like that. I really never read a book that that wove together the personal and the professional in that way. And I wanted to write that kind of book. I felt very called to write that kind of book.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I do think you know, the new memoir of yours is an integration of your
Yes.
professional and your personal journey from what I've seen. And you know, I think we're all shaped, as little or as much as we want to admit it, we're all shaped by our early experiences.
Yes.
You know, I think we can doubt that. But yeah, I think it was very brave of you to also share that with a wider audience of, you know, readership. And
Well,
yeah,
it didn't feel brave. It was
okay.
funny. People have been saying, "Well, do you feel brave? Does it feel brave?" And I feel that, after all those years of hiding my name, as though telling my name would
Yeah,
be like this terrible thing,
right,
I
right.
feel that telling the truth of my life didn't feel brave. It just felt, this is the truth of my life.
Yeah, yeah,
And I waited until a point of my life where I'm not out to get anybody or I feel compassionate towards everybody in the story. I think my mother, I don't want to give away the story of who my father was, because I want people, it's a mystery story, and it's interesting who he was, and she had a reason to keep him from me. So I don't want to, give away the,
right.
the, the, the,
Yeah,
the
we'll let
mystery.
everyone read it.
But
Yeah,
she had her reasons.
yeah,
She had her reasons.
yeah,
But I'm compassionate towards her. I wish I'd known the truth before she died, because I think the truth would have meant that she and I could have had a conversation, rather than my being angry at her
right,
through my whole life
right, right.
for what she had taken away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I feel good about telling the truth, I should say this, one of the reasons I feel so good about telling the truth about my life
Mm-hmm.
is there are many moments in this book where I'm cruel
Mm-hmm.
to my mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a kind of unintentional cruelty,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
because I am so angry at her
Yeah,
for keeping my father from me.
right.
And I think that um, by sharing those moments,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it will encourage people to speak the truth to their children.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, I think by keeping things hidden, you
Right.
encourage these moments of unintentional
Right.
cruelty, because a child is angry at you,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
really a conversation.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have been able to say to my mother, I understand why you're keeping my father from me. And
Right.
I'm on your side.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me, but I'm on your side. Or
Yeah.
maybe I can handle who he is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I understand what you're doing.
Right. And I mean, that is, I mean, I think that's a moment of empathy right there. And I can relate
Yes.
personally to,
Yes.
sort of how our relationship with our parents evolves over time, or,
Right.
you know, hopefully evolves over time, so that there's a little bit more communication and transparency, let's call it. But you also, I know you write a little bit about how, your grandparents also were immigrants. Is that right?
No,
To
they were second generation Americans, but they were very steeped. My family was not an immigrant family, but the book reads like an immigrant story, because even though they weren't immigrants, we lived in a very insular world, as though we were immigrants.
Mhm.
And one of the things that in which this was very dramatic,
Mhm.
was that I was called, I was like the designated adult of the family. My family was very fearful.
Yeah.
They were Jews. They
Mhm.
had lived through the Holocaust in the United States, but they had watched this, and they had watched the anti-Semitism in the United States, and they sort of felt it could happen here. And so there was a sense that they didn't belong, they didn't know if they belonged. So when somebody, and they thought of me, because after my mother left my father when I was 1 year old, we came back to live with my grandparents. And I was like 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, but I was considered the most kind of capable of like handling a tradesperson if they came to do the plumbing, or a delivery person if they came to make a delivery. I would take what he had. I would pay him. I would tip him. I would make sure that everything went well. So it has that kind of responsibility as a child marked my childhood in a very particular way. I mean, sometimes as I was writing the book, I even thought, Sherry, were you ever a child? Were you ever a child? Were you ever just like a person without responsibilities?
Yeah.
And I think that, I had dark days when I thought, no, I never was. I was always, taking care of the delivery person and tipping them. So I don't think I was really, I was not given chores. I was let alone to read and to have my imagination wander, but I was not, I don't think I ever had a sort of sense of not being the responsible person in my family. Which gives the story in the book a kind of odd, who was the writer here? Is she like 5 years old, or is this the grown up of the family? But one thing I try to do in terms of the methodology of the book is to put myself into the voice of the age I was when I'm in the chapter that I'm writing about. And I try to do that very, really make that a discipline to give you a sense of how I was thinking, as a young child. But it's clear that I'm a very old soul at 5 years old.
I was going to say, it sounds like you were shouldering a lot of responsibility even at a young age. And, you were always maybe a bit of a mature kind of old soul kind of kid. And on the note actually about your process, so I did want to touch on the fact that you are teaching a memoir class at MIT.
Yes.
Could you maybe we'll start with the Empathy Diaries. Could you talk us through your process a little bit more in detail, beyond getting into the voice of the age of the person? What was your process like in terms of jotting your life down?
Well, I teach 2 classes at MIT, and they, which I've been teaching very consistently, and they have something in common, which is I'm very interested in something called evocative objects. That is to say, I'm drinking my tea from a cup that was given to me by a close friend, and I have a set of them, and there's no question that these mugs and that friendship and the trips to Italy and the Deruta pottery and that whole world of the pottery, the Italy, the family visits that makes these mugs what I call an evocative object. They're part of and so many of the objects in my home. I mean, I choose the objects in my home as things that really mean something to me. And I believe that objects carry ideas and meanings and feelings, and that my study of computers and computation really has been based on thinking of the computer as an evocative object. So my process is very much to begin writing by taking an object that's central to the time and place and space of a particular chapter and write about that. So for example, in the chapter of going away to college, in my sophomore year, my sophomore year, my grandmother gives me a taupe Smith Corona portable electric typewriter.
Okay.
Because I'd struggled all freshman year without a typewriter. There was one that Radcliffe had. I went to Radcliffe. There was one which used to be the women's side of Harvard College. You know, I'd waited online for the public typewriter, and then it really didn't work. And then my papers always looked terrible because the keys stuck. I mean, my professors kind of had a trust. When you read a paper that's like disgustingly typed, you sort of grade it down because it kind of looks, horrible. And I really, it was bad. And I never could compose on a typewriter because I just could like grab it for the little bit of time just to type up the paper. And we didn't have much money, and my grandmother really skimped to get me. I think the typewriter must have cost like $60 at the time, which was so much money for her. This portable electric typewriter, in its case, I still have it. And I write about, she bought it at Macy's, and in the beginning of the school year, how I came back to this sitting on her kitchen table and how my grandfather couldn't contain himself. And he kept screeching, "It's from Ida, it's from Ida," which was his pet name from her. "It's from Mama, it's from Mama." I mean, it was like the joy of their year that they had gotten me this thing. And whenever I have writer's block or whenever I'm sort of depressed, actually, I take out this Smith Corona electric portable typewriter, and and I'll write on it. And I wrote the chapters about that period in my life, really beginning with her giving me that typewriter and what it meant to me. And then other chapters had other objects, and I tried to, in the first draft of the book, each chapter was a different object.
That's amazing.
And then gradually I decided that was too, what's the word, precious.
Okay.
It was not a mature, it was like a stepping stone. It wasn't the final draft.
Sure.
But it definitely was my way of getting into the moment and into the power of the moment. And there are a lot of objects in my book. There's my grandmother's dishes. There's the Smith Corona typewriter. There's a pocketbook. There are 15 dresses. There are, there's food. There's Passover. There's Rosh Hashanah dishes. There's a lot of knives and forks. But there are a lot of clothes. That's for sure. There's the dress that I bought. There's the dress that I wore when my mother died. There's a lot of clothes.
Right. That's what we experience our moments in.
Yes.
Get imbued with sort of meaning and feeling. And
there's a lot of sheets and pillowcases because I worked as a cleaning lady in Paris to earn money, and I don't know how to clean the windows without Windex. And so I call my grandmother to ask her, "How do you clean windows without Windex?" And she tells me newspaper and vinegar. So there's a lot of newspaper and vinegar. It's just there's a lot of stuff in the book. And that's part of what I teach at MIT. I teach the sociology and psychology of technical stuff. That's my job. That's my day job. So I've used all of that to write this book. I've used all of that to write this book.
That's amazing. And I think that's very cool, actually, that you still have the typewriter that you had when you
Yes, I do. And if you want me to come and do your, I can do Windows too. So if things don't go well, with the book, I'm like,
absolutely.
I really can clean a house. So
no, I will take your tips, and I will take your grandmother's tips, and I will do it myself.
We don't have Windex, newspapers and vinegar. You can find a newspaper.
That's a good, exactly. Nowadays, niche, probably, but yeah, we'll have to take that one for our
Yeah.
for the book here. But yeah, so you do you have your students actually kind of pick an object or kind of remember and like
Oh
hold
yes,
it in.
we begin with writing about objects. We write about objects all year, and then uh, we write about a room that was filled with objects that they remember, and we talk about the objects in the room, and then they end up writing a memoir, a short memoir.
And
So
by the end, they actually have. Do you pick a specific phase of your life, or is it just about any time period?
no, they're allowed to pick a phase of the idea is to write a memoir fragment.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the difference between a memoir and an autobiography is a memoir can just be like, my junior year in college or 3 months of my life, or, it doesn't have to be
Gotcha.
it doesn't need to be, in the
Yeah.
beginning and taking you to the end. I mean, my memoir ends when I get tenure at MIT and write the
Mhm.
second self. So it takes me from the beginning to when I sort of find my voice as as a as a scholar of the computer culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
I
the arc that I take.
right, right. And I mean, I will say just selfishly, I wish I had known about your class when I was when I was in school, because I definitely would have taken it. Although I don't know that I would have had that much to write about at the time, but
Everybody thinks they don't have anything to write about and they don't have an object.
okay.
And I sometimes say, call your mother.
Uh-huh.
And with those 3 words, some people do call their mothers, and then some people say, well, I wonder what my mother would say. And then right away they have an object. Just the words, call your mother. They
Yeah.
can kind of put themselves in their mother's place, and all of a sudden they have an object. So it works. It works whether or not they call their mother.
Okay. Okay. This is a good exercise to know actually for all
Right.
of our aspiring
Everybody has an object.
yeah, yeah, that's amazing.
In
And
all my years of teaching,
yeah.
no one has, we'll talk later.
Okay, okay, yeah. And I did want to actually touch on what you said earlier about the computer, or now maybe our cell phones, as a bit of an evocative object.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I was gonna say, like, our whole lives are in here now on these devices, and so how do you even? I mean, can you tell us actually a little bit more about the study of the devices as a bit of an object? Like, this has literally everything, right? So how do you even break it
My
down like
first,
that?
my first book on computers was called The Second Self
Yep.
because I wrote that in 1984. It was quite prescient
Yes.
because it really was about the way in which people used the
Yeah.
mirror of the machine. At that
Mhm.
point, before there was the internet, there was primitive internet, but I mean, most people didn't have it. Just the idea that the computer was there as a kind of one little girl, one 13-year-old, she wasn't so little, she said, when you program, you take a piece of your mind and you put it in the computer's mind and you come to see yourself differently.
Whoa.
And that's what gave me the idea to call it the second self.
Yeah.
And it was really an interesting time at MIT because when I said, I want to write about this, and I'm going to be writing about the computer as this evocative object, and how people project themselves onto this computer, people said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. The computer is just a tool. And I said, no.
Yeah.
No. Look what people are saying.
Yeah.
Look what people are. And everyone was saying, no, you're wasting your time. You won't get tenure. It's just a tool. And I said,
Yeah.
I'm going to take my chances.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then by the time I wrote my next book, which was called Life on the Screen, people were like into fantasy role-playing games and living their life on the internet. And then, of course, the change, to get back to your question, between Life on the Screen and Alone Together, which was by the time you got to Alone Together, people were like carrying around the internet, which gave it a whole other feeling.
Yeah.
And that was really when I became, I think, more critical in my approach. And people say, well, you used to like it, you used to have all these good things to say. It's not that I changed my mind. It's that if you always have your attention divided between the fascination with what's in your hand and and the person you're looking at, that changes the nature of your contact.
Right.
And that's what started to bother me.
Yeah.
It used to be when I began to study computers and people, you'd say, okay, well, I'm going to go play an online character. Excuse me, I'm going to go, this was a lovely dinner. I'm going to go to my room now and play my online character. See you guys in the morning.
Right.
Now you're like playing, you're like doing your thing, while you're in a conversation. And that's a very, very different psychologically, and I'm a psychologist, that's a very different kind of psychology altogether. So that was really the big shift for me. And by the time I got to my last book on the computer, on the internet, on texting and so forth, which was Reclaiming Conversation, I basically said, look, we've all got to rethink the importance of just talking to each other. And of course, now all we do is talk to each other on screens, and it's
the pandemic certainly has changed a little bit of, I'm sure
a little bit, a lot.
I wish we could be having this conversation in person, together. But it's one of those things where I feel the pros are that we can connect with folks kind of outside of our local geographies, maybe a little bit more, but at the same time, I think
well, there are so many pros. I think the challenge is going to be when we can connect with each other, in person. Will we? Or will we say, oh, well, I'd rather have, be able to include everybody from around the country and do it on Zoom? I think it's going to be very complicated now that we're so used to being able to open things up to anybody wherever they are. I think it's going to be, we're going to have a lot of hard decisions ahead. And I think what's good is that we are all a little bit experts now at what we gain and what we lose. So when our companies tell us, well, this is how we should do it, this is the right way, I think we're in a better position to say, maybe that's not the best. I'm also an expert on what I've lost. I also know that I've lost some things. So maybe it's not the best way for everything. So I think we're a little bit more on equal footing with our employers and with our teachers. Because I know that after 2 semesters of Zoom teaching, I'm so happy that I could see my students. But nobody's going to tell me it's like being in a room with them. Nobody's going to pitch that to me, that it was so great and now I can have more students. And nobody's going to convince me of that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think there is definitely still something to be said about face-to-face or, in-person interaction. Don't have a device in the middle. So one day soon, hopefully we will be back there. But
I look forward.
Yeah, definitely. And actually getting back to talking about MIT and campus life and all of this, I did want to circle back actually to, in your book, I think you touch on your career path and also your path at MIT and sort of moving up the ladder and getting tenure and that whole process. And, in light of the fact that it is Women's History Month in March, but also I think we should be talking about and celebrating women's journeys forever and all the time. And so I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your journey through sort of the academic ranks and your journey to get tenure. I know it was a
little bumpy.
Yeah.
Well, when I came to MIT, there weren't a whole lot of women. There were some path breakers. But there weren't a lot of women. So I was certainly in my department, I think I was the only woman on the faculty when I came up for tenure. There certainly were no tenured women in my department. I think when I came up for tenure, I was the only woman.
Wow.
Now I was fired before I was rehired.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I tell that story in the book. It's a very dramatic. I tell it just flat the way it happened. I don't dramatize it. Like I say, I'm writing this book at a very good place. I'm in a very good place because I'm not mad. I'm not glad. I'm not sad. I mean, I have no axe to grind. I've had a wonderful career at MIT. It's been good to me. It's enabled me to do the work of my life. It's been very good to me. So it's not a book that's, it's not written like, oh, MIT, how you, but I'm honest that, I was kind of like, my work at that point was challenging of the engineering culture. I thought the culture of simulation, when you start to simulate things, I was finding a lot of people who were, the simulation was just as good as the real. A lot of people who saw engineering values friction-free, use that kind of language a lot, and thought that maybe human relations should be friction-free too. Whereas I'm like, no, human relations, like, no, I don't think so. Human relations, who said that human relations should be friction-free? Technology says. I saw a kind of shift from meaning to mechanism and ways of thinking about the mind. I didn't think that was 100%. I talked about that. I mean, there were just a bunch of things that I brought to the conversation. But that was my job. I was hired to do that, so, and I've written this book, The Second Self, which had some, critical things. Anyway, I was not given tenure, even though I had two really, very substantial books and articles, and essentially the reason was not, I don't think it was, oh, she's a woman, well, why should we have, I don't think it was, she's a woman, I don't think we really need one of those. But it was before people were looking to hire women, that was for sure. Being a woman was not like, oh, that would be really good to hire a woman. It was more like, I was not a scientist, and if MIT was going to have social scientists, then maybe they should be scientific. So maybe they should be scientific ones. And this kind of methodology where I interviewed people and I talked about the meaning and the psychology of the computer culture, maybe that wasn't necessary. But when I was denied tenure, they didn't sort of do it on the basis of my record. They made up a rule, like nobody could be in my department without having an appointment in my department and in another department. It kind of made up a, like a bureaucratic rule, just when I was coming up for tenure. And I knew that just to get tenure, my best shot was not to argue the merits of my case, but just to say, hey, what's with this new rule 15 minutes before my case comes up? I was hired in my department. There was a man who was coming up with me who, as soon as they made this rule, they gave him 2 appointments. They didn't give me a second appointment. How come how come the guy gets an appointment? So I went to see the provost, whose name was Francis Lowe at the time, a very distinguished physicist. And I said, look, this isn't right. I mean, labor law, you make up a rule 15 minutes before I'm coming up for tenure. I never even heard about this rule. Didn't give me a chance to even investigate if there's another department here who wants me. What is this? And I said, look at my work. I have these 2 books. I'm a credit to you. And I said, I'm not going to sue, but I'm not going to go quietly. I think I'm a Ms. Magazine Woman of the Year. I'm a Fortune 40 people under 40 who's changing our nation. You're going to have to say why you're asking me to leave. And he like looked at me. He says, "I mean, like people will write about this."
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, why are you firing this 40 under 40 person who's changing our nation?"
Right.
I'm changing our nation, and you're asking me to. And I had tenure the next day. I mean, it really just happened like that. It was
Wow.
really quite a dramatic. So I think I really don't want to say it was a simple story of I was being discriminated against as a woman. I think it was a story of an institution that at that particular moment in time didn't necessarily feel it wanted an irritant.
Right.
I really didn't have a constituency.
Yeah.
There was no constituency for critics of the computer culture.
Right.
All of that would come later. So
Yeah.
I think I really had to fight, not really because of my gender,
Mm-hmm.
but because only now, and with a lot, and even now, is there really a constituency in the world for people who say, well, look, what's the kind of downside
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
some of these technologies?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and even look now. I mean, look how. I mean, I've been talking about Facebook and privacy for 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've personally been saying, without privacy, there is no democracy. Without
Mm-hmm.
privacy, there is no intimacy. Without intimacy, democracy, privacy, these things are intertwined. You cannot scrape people's data and expect a healthy democratic. I mean, we have to think about all of this. And actually, there's been a lot of. I'm trying to capture the response, but it was sort of like, no, no. I mean, who wants to think about this? Because it means closing your Facebook account. It means like your mail. It means your friends. It means oh my God, people. And a lot of people would say to me, lighten up. I don't mind getting the ads.
Okay.
I like the ads. I like that they know I want to get ballet slippers from Ann Taylor.
Yep.
And it was very hard to explain to people.
Yeah.
It's not just that you're getting ads. Yeah. Because people kind of like the ads.
Yeah.
And to try to explain that what's being taken from you is more than information that's going to give you great ads that you really want to see. Right. Is not so easy.
Yeah.
And it's taken a long time. I mean, I really want to give credit to all of the many of my students and the many scholars all over the country, colleagues and organizations, and who really have over really the past 20 years have really created a culture of researchers who I think are finally making a difference. So if you say to somebody now, well, Facebook, plus minus, people at least can say, well, look, I see some minuses. I see what they did during the election, this COVID disinformation thing, the vaccine disinformation. Look, the election disinformation, I see, I get it. Yeah. But that's very new. Yeah. That's very new. So to give MIT credit, I mean, that in 1984, 85, the idea of having one of me was a big, that was a big step. Yeah. And they, if they didn't have to make that step, I don't think they I sort of, made it hard for them not to take that step.
Yeah. So it occurs to me now, it's like fascinating talking with you about this actually, because, there's been a lot that's happened, especially in technology and devices and all of this and privacy over the last, even 20, 30 years. And you were so ahead of the curve, kind of knowing and sort of seeing the future down the line. And it's interesting to me, especially about your tenure journey, that sorry, they being maybe the institution, thought maybe having an outsider was not a good thing. And I know you write a little bit about this, like your perspective as an outsider. You know, when I think of MIT now, or at least the time that I was there, everybody wanted to be a little bit of an outsider. You know, they were kind of like, oh, we welcome critical thinking, we welcome, you know, critiques, and people should be free to express this. And I just feel like it's just inspiring to hear, you know, that you were advocating for this, you know, in
Well,
your
I'm
time.
happy if I helped create the atmosphere where people say things like that. I mean, I'm
Exactly.
very proud.
Exactly.
I'm very
Yeah.
proud that, you know, that
Yeah.
in terms of critiques of the computer culture, I
Right.
think
Right.
that I did a lot to
Yeah. Absolutely.
encourage that atmosphere.
Right. I think
But
you critique.
I don't think at the beginning I was like,
Yeah. Mhm.
um, I really can't say that it was a story of, oh, you just do that, girl. You just go, girl. You just, but I've got to say, I had people who, from the very beginning, were incredibly supportive.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
for example, Walter Rosenblith, who was the provost of MIT for many years, was
Mhm.
part of my hiring,
Okay.
and he was incredibly supportive.
Mhm.
Jerome Wiesner, who was
Mhm.
the president of MIT when I was hired,
Mhm.
incredibly supportive. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I had some visionary people who
Yeah.
had been leaders of the Institute at my hiring
Mhm. Thank
who
goodness. Yeah.
were really quite supportive.
Yeah. That's
So, I mean,
wonderful.
I don't want to mean, you know, there was a reason I got here.
Yeah.
Harry Hannum, who was the dean of the School of Social Sciences and Humanities, incredibly supportive.
Mhm.
You know, so you know, I want to say that, you know, it was, um, uh, you know, it wasn't as though I didn't have people who said, look, we hired her to do a job.
Right. Right.
She came here, she did the job we asked her to do. It kind of, you know, she's writing best-selling books about the thing we asked her to write about.
Right.
Not
Right.
so nice. Then we say, well, now you can go, you know,
Yeah.
and pitch this someplace else. I mean, you know, I want to be,
Yeah.
you know, I want to give credit to the people who did support me and who did, you know, and they wouldn't have kept me on if there weren't people who were very much on my side.
Absolutely. And thank goodness for that. And thank goodness that you were there to blaze this trail. Because
Right.
really, yeah, in some ways it's funny because when I think of the Institute now, it's like MIT is always a little bit of an outsider. I feel like in some ways, as an organization, as an institution, they like to, you know, think ahead, and so.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I could have done my work really anyplace else.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, very early, Michael Dertuzos, who was the head of the Laboratory for Computer Science, said, "This is great work.
Yeah.
Let me give you an office. Let me buy you a tape." I mean, at the time, I had like this tape recorder. It was like this, you know, cassette. You
Yeah.
know, I bought it at Radio Shack. It looked like, honestly, it was like really. I mean, it cost like, you know, I think $30. It was my
Yeah.
graduate student tape recorder. And he looked at it and he said, "Oh no, you're an MIT researcher now." And, you know, within 15 minutes, I had like something that, you know, was like the last word in micro mini. I mean, God knows what I had. You know, when he set me up with, you know, with a computer and I was on the net and I had, you know, I mean, he introduced me to everybody who I needed to talk to, and he said, "Talk to her. She's doing great work. Talk to her." So, I mean, I had, I'm grateful. I mean, the book is filled with my gratitude. I mean, it has this funny chapter where it's like, okay, well, in this chapter, I almost lose my job, you know, kind of like I'm doing really well, people. And then in this chapter, I almost lose my job. But basically, it's filled with my gratitude. Because this has been being here. I mean, I didn't want to leave. I mean, that was also it. I had plenty of other places I could go and be a humanist and not get fired for being too humanistic or, you know, too Freudian but I wanted to be here because this was where the life of what I was studying really was. So I knew what I was doing to
Yeah.
fight for my job here. I wanted to stay.
Yeah. 100%. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody now is glad that you did, and you know,
Well,
yeah.
let's not take a vote. Let's just say I did, and
Yeah.
I'm glad I did.
You did. Yeah.
Let's
Exactly.
not force the vote.
Well said, well said. Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
but I did, now we're coming up on the last 10 minutes actually already. And I just wanted to make sure that we cover a couple more things. But, just another call for our participants. If you have any questions for Dr. Turkle, for Sherry, let us know. But this theme of actually being an outsider and kind of peering from the outside in, as a child maybe, but also like through your adolescence, through college, and then all the way up to start your career. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that, and sort of how do you think being an outsider helps you develop empathy for others?
Well, I talk a lot in the book about a term that comes from a French anthropologist named Levi Strauss. It's called dépaysement, means decountrifying.
Mhm.
And it's the thing that anthropologists do when they go out of their country, so then they can see their country better because they see it as strangers.
Ah, right.
And it's the powerful thing that anthropologists get to do, because sometimes you get it when you even take a vacation, like you go to Italy, or you go to France, and then you go back to the United. This used to be more true a few years ago, and then you come back to the United States and you say, why do we have not so much fresh fruit?
Right.
Don't we have, or do we have enough kind of different kinds of apples? Or
Uh-huh.
why do we just have one kind of apple or three kinds of apples? Or are we missing different kinds of carrots? Why don't we
Yeah.
just have three kinds of carrots? Like, don't we have enough? Do we have enough kinds of carrots? You just realize, things about like our food, or you notice things, or like our cars are very big, kind of like, so you go to Europe and you come back and say, God, our cars are big, and or and that being an outsider in order to see your own culture more clearly really has been the defining, something very defining about my life.
Mhm.
And I had it when I was a baby, because I was different from everybody else. I didn't have a name,
Mhm.
and I was lying. Then I was lying about my name. I was
Mhm.
always an outsider. I mean, it was very, I was always an outsider because I couldn't let my identity show. So I was always so I developed the kind of skills of an outsider. And it's alienating and it's lonely, but I sort of turned it into a superpower in a way.
Mhm.
So I think that when people feel, I will only say to all the people who sometimes feel lonely, or not part of the group, or in my case, I couldn't be part of the group. I didn't have, I was so alone, and it was so odd, my life, hiding and not letting anybody know who I was, and hiding my name. And it was so odd. I will only say that there's sort of something to turn that situation into your private superpower, because you learn to see, first of all, that other people, that the official story in your case is not the only story. But
Okay.
that means that other people's official stories
Mhm.
are not the only story.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And that is very powerful information,
Yeah. Yeah.
to know that the official story is not the only story. That is
Yeah.
very powerful information,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
very good to know,
Yeah. And liberating, probably.
and very liberating. And if you really know that deep in your heart, you that really is a superpower,
Yeah.
to know there's always another story next to the story. So look, when all these engineers were saying, oh, don't study the computer, it's just a tool,
Uh-huh.
and you're saying, really?
Mhm.
Then how come the people I'm talking about are talking about like they're seeing themselves in it, they're projecting their mind onto it, it's like a Rorschach test, just like, look at my interviews, come, I've taped them, listen with me.
Yeah.
No, it's just a tool. It was a superpower.
Yeah. 100%. And now I do want to project actually a little bit into the future, maybe in the last couple of minutes, and say, oh, we actually had couple questions come in the meantime, so let's try to get to these. Okay, so Emily, thank you. Question, I am a woman of the same generation as yourself. I too had a career in technology, though in commercial, not academic settings. To what extent do you think that the perceptions and opportunities for women have improved in the last 40 years, if at all?
Well, I think they've improved a lot, except that all of a sudden you read some horror story about what's going on, and then they realize, I wonder, you think they've so improved, and then you read something
Yeah.
about what's going on in some large company, and you just want to, go under the covers and pull the covers on over your head. So obviously, I would be a fool not to say that they've super improved. I'm on all these panels with women in technology. I mean, so, I'm not unaware of the many improvements.
Right.
But I think that there's still a problem, and I'd be a super fool to not say, look, there's still a problem.
Yeah.
Can
always be better, right? We can always.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. I much improvement, but I would be like just blind to the reality if I didn't say that I think there's still so much trouble.
Yeah, and we can do more. And then Lynn says, I'm very drawn to the ideas you put forth about evocative objects in your edited volume in that title. And in that introduction, you allude to psychoanalytic internal objects, including Winnicott. These objects seem to overlap or become entangled with those evocative material objects you reference, which is something I work with as an art historian. In your memoir, which I look forward to reading, do you make connections to empathic objects as well, those maternal and paternal objects that stand in as transitional objects?
I do, but I try to write definitely. And so is this Emily? Is this
Lynn?
Lynn. So Lynn, I definitely do, but I definitely tried in this memoir to write it for people who didn't need to know they were reading. Like I try to introduce these ideas without using these big words. So I don't say that, but you will, if you read my book, you will see it, because I'm talking about I'll tell you where in the book. I'm talking about a knitted white cap that my mother gives me. And if you read the book and you come to the knitted white cap, that's one of those.
Ah, okay. There you go, Lynn, for a knitted white cap.
Special for you, Lynn.
Look out for that. Awesome. So yeah, I was just going to say, in the last minute or two that we have together, what are your thoughts kind of looking forward, now that we're maybe on the downswing for COVID and there's vaccinations on the horizon, maybe there's an end in sight, and our relationship with technology has changed because of the pandemic. What do you think it's going to be like going forward after we get out of this?
Well, I think that we have to be very wise, because I think that there are a lot of people in large institutions who are going to say, oh my God, we can do so much remotely now. We have learned so much about remote work. This is incredible. We can save so much money. I can't believe it. You can teach, You can do all these things remotely. But I think that we really have to, and politically, let's not get together in communities. Let's just do these remote things. But I'm optimistic. Mm-hmm. And I'm speaking here to parents, I'm speaking here to people who are teachers. We are now experts about what we can accomplish remotely. I mean, I've done my absolute best to communicate with you. I've really made an effort, but it's not the same as if I were with you. 100%. Next time, parents, that somebody says to you, do I have a computer program for you? It's so incredible. It will deliver content to your child, and then it'll measure your child's progress, and then it will test him, and it'll develop a personalized thing for your child all on the screen. You should say as a parent, well, I've had a year with my child in screens, and what I think my child needs is a mentor, a relationship, somebody who will love him and her or her. Because my book is filled. I mean, I am here today. I'm at MIT. I succeeded in my life because I had mentors. I had people who believed in me. I had it didn't come just from, wasn't from a home where people were like teaching me stuff, and they loved me, but they did not, they weren't in a position to nurture my intellectual ambitions.
Mhm.
I had teachers who said, we believe in you and we care about you and we are here for you. And in terms of the women issue that came up, I want to say that they were male mentors, and I was not hit on.
Yep.
The story of my time at Harvard and Harvard Graduate School and the University of Chicago was not a time of fending off, I mean, I really had a great experience. I didn't have female mentors, and that's too bad. Yeah. Because so much I could have learned, it would have been so helpful to me. I felt so insecure as a woman in academics, but I had really these male mentors who believed in me. Yeah. And that is what people need. They need people who will sit with them and talk to them and give them feedback on papers. And I mean, I really try to give feedback to my students on papers. And not enough students come to see me because it makes them feel vulnerable. It's easier to just send an email, So anyway, that's what I want to end on, is that, people are going to be trying to sell all of us all kinds of new kinds of screen time. And I'd like us all to just make sure that we don't put the technology first, we put our human needs first.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, wise words to end on. Dr. Turkle, thank you so much for taking the time.
This is really a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And Empathy Diaries, again, by Sherry Turkle, out now and available through the link that we will share on our MITF website. And thank you, panel. Thank you, questions that came in. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Dr. Turkle, again. And
my pleasure.
Look forward to reading it. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night and see you soon.